I'm Kieran James-Lubin, CEO of BlockApps, old-time Web3 blockchain, whatever you want to call it, person, answering a couple questions that have been posed to me. So I'm just going to start off with, what advice do you give to Web3 founders in the current economic climate, fundraising, hiring, maybe to some extent operations, etc.? So it's been an interesting few weeks in that. So on the one hand, I've been going through a project of catching up with lots of people I know, people I went to school with, haven't seen in a while. Some people I've seen recently, people who I've encountered in a professional context, et cetera, et cetera. So somehow I actually have some pretty timely information from, the market, if you will, about this question. A handful of folks are Web3 founders trying to either raise a friends and family round or raise a first, like a pre-seed type round. Some are in later stages, having been operating for a couple of years to several years, more established, et cetera. And I think fairly uniformly, people are having a tough time, right? It is, I haven't been around for that many cycles, but the least friendly general capital market that we've seen, and we've been at this since like really, 2015 and really getting going into 2016. And it was tough for a couple of years there. And then we had the frothy years with the sort of pandemic asset bubble. And it's worse than the tough previous years out there at this moment. So my advice on fundraising pretty much is like, pretty much don't bother. Find some non-traditional path. So if you got an institutional money manager on the other side, pretty much they've just totally frozen. And yes, a few of them are allocating their rounds that are going on and this and that. But so I have a non-Web3 friend who has a SaaS business and has killed it, like, in a reasonable amount of time, 3xing recurring revenues, et cetera. And he had a really hard time, raising around and not quite the terms he wanted. It's true in Web3 also. You're getting really aggressive, not just, valuations, but terms are coming in. People are trying to pull out all sorts of extra rights that they wouldn't have asked for a year or two ago. So it's ugly. And so if you can avoid it, just like don't do it. If you have to do it, go non-traditional. Could be family offices, could be pre-purchases of some kind. I still, occasionally watch like what some of the DAOs out there have done. I go to the Links DAO example a lot, but there are others like this where, in essence, they sold a product, but they sold it to a big group of people and kind of a little bit ahead of delivery of that product, but were able to bring in proceeds that allow them to execute and then deliver on it. So, Web3 is fairly friendly to some maybe better version of the Kickstarter model. Obviously, it takes a lot of excitement and a big community to do that. But yeah, it's ugly out there. If you really need to raise money, accept that it's going to be ugly. And I would avoid institutional financing if possible. All of it kind of tends to point in the same direction. So it's either all allocating or it's not allocating at all. It's very correlated, hard to find contrarians out there. So people are taking meetings, and whatnot and gathering info. They're kind of occasionally funding things, but it's nowhere like what it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, which were sort of historic funding bubble times. So that's fundraising. On the hiring side, so I would say at the moment, it's gotten a little easier to hire in the sense that for kind of almost the same reasons, right? So suddenly all the capital has gotten sucked out and most tech companies or many are contracting in terms of headcount. And so there's talent available in the market that wouldn't otherwise be available. And I would say one of the things I've learned is, so you want to get as best an indication as you can of, whether you should make a hire or not, and err on the side of not making it, just because these are those sort of times. And if and when you do make it, you want to kind of really see if there's a fit as early as possible. So I think you tend to find new hire is a little like an organ transplant. So you can find that the host rejects the new organ, and you want to know that as soon as possible before it damages the whole system. So I think the important thing is to be really clear at the outset and hard, not like rude or anything, but like hard on people as appropriate. And if they fit the culture, et cetera, provide a path to advancement and all that sort of thing. But, you have to sort of set the standard pretty early. It's also sort of a little bit more possible to do this now than it used to be, where, it feels like, a tech employer, there's lots of leverage at the moment where, you felt like it wasn't this way 2 years ago. Yeah, the reality is there's always, it's a contract you don't have to enter. So there's always some amount of leverage as an employer, and also really good talent will always get good offers. So, there's always a balance there, but it's, as far as tech is concerned, probably become historically, anti-employee friendly in the last 6 to 12 months as compared with the sort of long venture capital fueled boom cycle of the last decade or so. Everybody, my name is James-Lubin. I'm the CEO of BlockApps, and have been asked to answer a couple questions about operating a company from a CEO perspective. So the question is, what is the criteria for selecting good co-founders? So I have only really had one, maybe two, you could count it, shots at this question. It has happened to work out quite well. I don't know that I ran it's not like I thought about it really hard. In fact, there's some article, I think maybe Paul Graham wrote, where it's fairly common for people to just like jump in and start companies with people you don't know super well. And I would say that was to some extent the case here. Now, the way it actually happened, probably I knew our CTO for about 6 months before we got going, and our chief product officer for about 2-3 months before we got going. So there was some, amount of time to get to know each other and see how we'd behave together. But, it's not as long as some, I think. So I think in practice, what one should do. So we got lucky that this worked out, right? We're still all here after years and years working hard. Things are working, for the company, et cetera. So I think what you should do, if I were to do this again, is try to meet lots of people through your life in a semi-professional to professional context. So this could be in school. This could be even in a social but not entirely social setting. Like, let's say, if you're in New York, which is a bit of a biased sample, there are lots of people who sort of socialize with each other all the time, but then start some local business, a bar, a restaurant, an art gallery, something like this, where those two things are sort of entwined, excuse me. You don't want to like observe people in a professional context if you can for a long period of time. And then you can kind of generally see, if they're reliable, if they follow through on their commitments, if they're hardworking, they're capable, all that sort of thing. So that's what I would do. And again, we got lucky that it sort of worked out. I think I was lucky that my co-founders had worked together in a previous business and were kind of looking around for a project to do. And also for each of them, it was their third startup. So they kind of knew what they were in for, the ups and downs, all that sort of thing. You want, sometimes like what you want sort of a, somewhat matched level of risk tolerance. And you want that to be pretty high, at least. Like you don't want things to take time, right? So if someone has 3 months or 6 months before they need to run off back to a big corporate job because they've got private school payments or, this or that, right? It might not work if you're, just out of grad school, no real responsibilities, lots of time to devote to the thing, et cetera, right? So some level of risk appetite matching kind of has to happen. And I suppose it could vary. It could be structured differently. Like it's kind of common for a founding CEO to be maybe totally all in on a thing, but a founding CTO to get sort of like much less equity, but actually get like a half a salary for a while. That's not uncommon. And then maybe join, really full on full time um, when some funding comes in, for instance. But ideally, the risk appetite and kind of commitment level is the same across all the parties. And then generally, like you want the people to be very capable, um, low ego, like mature enough to find a lane and as part of, and that's always an evolving question, and work within it as part of the group. Like to the extent possible, you want non-overlapping responsibilities just to avoid confusion, and also like ego flare-ups and all that sort of thing. And you want good high integrity people. In business, you'll encounter plenty of people who are not that. And you're probably signing up for a 10-year journey if you're really serious about making a big successful tech business. Sometimes it's faster than that, sometimes it's slower, but to really make something work tends to take a while, right? And so you're going to be dealing with these people for that whole time, presumably, or some big subset of it. So you want them to be people you can work with, and pretty high integrity, and all that sort of thing. And it's strange. So founding a company requires both like a degree of maybe slightly irrational optimism, but to be like level-headed on like what's working, what's not, and how things are going, et cetera. It's like it's hard to keep those two things in mind. So you want the co-founders to sort of have that too. You don't want them to be too jumpy, you don't want them to be too Pollyanna optimistic either. But yeah, I mean, so I think the way to do this, let's say, if I have no designs on the next business, but if I did, I think what I would do is like try to do a bunch of smaller projects with different people that could grow into something bigger, but kind of time box it and just see. And ideally, people I'd already know I've met through the course of this business, or socially, or in school, or what have you, and then set some kind of input output guardrails on a time box. And if things go well, keep doing it, invest more heavily, etc. If they don't, it's okay. Maybe work with that same person again on a variant of the idea, a different idea. Maybe don't work with them again, and sort of like let it grow into something big and formal. Yeah. So it's a tricky thing to do, but it's also just like it's a contradiction in terms, but I still think it's good advice. It's like you want it to be people who you have some kind of track record of it, you know them pretty well. At the same time, you have to sort of just get started. So that is the way to do it, I guess. Like bite off something small before you get married, and the better that the person or people, the more likely you could jump all the way in at the outset. Thanks. I've been asked to answer a couple questions about the blockchain space from the perspective of founder, CEO, and here is one of those questions. All right. There's optimism that the next bull run crypto is gaining momentum, and it's imperative what is imperative that the industry does collectively to regain trust and clearly communicate the value proposition for blockchain. In other words, what can we learn from the past for better adoption outcomes in the near future? Yeah, and so it was interesting so I've lived through a couple of these crypto boom and bust cycles. It's sort of a cyclical industry, almost like the oil and gas sector or other commodity driven sectors, where in boom times people hire up. There's borderline euphoria, or definitely euphoria in the crypto space. In the bad times, people slim down, projects go under, there's some amount of consolidation, and the general mood is sort of pretty bad. Conferences are empty, people are kind of moping around, and then they're just waiting for the euphoria to return, perhaps. So it's been interesting with I would say maybe the low point was around this time last year, as the FTX news was breaking and more details were coming out and all that sort of thing. I think that also corresponds to the probably the low price points. And then, interestingly, I think of prices as not the goal or not that important, but they are a pretty good indicator of just market sentiment. So, it's not quite, but almost as if contagion spread from the crypto world to the traditional finance world. We lost some of the good tech focused banks and, placed in receivership and all that sort of thing. And some of the crypto focused banks, obviously. So, I think the explosion was bigger this time, right? So there was the boom and busts I've left through was the Mt. Gox one, the ICO boom, and this last one. This last one, in some ways, was the biggest and maybe most destructive. Although things have proved reasonably resilient, and I think the good thing about it is it clears out a lot of the kind of Johnny come lately bad actors who are in it to make a buck while the asset values are rising, and not that interested when the asset values are flat or falling. And that it's made people focus on a little more durable, long time horizon use cases. So we've been a company sort of focused on real assets, real world assets, whatever you want to call it. There are different definitions of it. Probably prior to at least the crypto industry adopting the name. Now it may be a financial term that has existed prior, but at the moment everyone is quite focused on real assets on chain. And it's something we were doing in a different form, in particular with enterprise customers for sort of many years prior. And it's been interesting to watch that be the kind of big overlap between those two worlds. And I think it's just the important lesson is that we should mostly think about use cases that would have happened were it not for blockchain technology, but happen substantially better with it. Like, this may be a silly example, but like people were taking car rides before Uber and Lyft. They're calling cabs, friends were picking friends up, all that sort of thing. It just wasn't like a big efficient market with good matching and clear pricing and all that sort of thing. And then the market got way bigger because of it, right? We should look for stuff like that, where it's an activity that people are doing or doing in some form, but there's some fundamental market inefficiency that can actually be fixed by the technology, and it expands or reforms a market in doing so. So I think that's the big thing. I also hope the asset prices don't run up too fast, right? Because if they run up really fast, you get the euphoria again, and it gets really noisy. People spend a ton on marketing, end users are confused, too much stuff is going on, and there's lots of bad projects that get capital. It almost causes the bust on the other side, the sort of crazy euphoria that occurs. But yeah, I think it's just about practical adoption of use cases that people would do more or less whether there are not blockchain technology out there. Like, I think the industry is getting quite a bit better at this actually, but is too jargony, end user forward with technical terminology, architecture, stuff that the average person or business doesn't really need to know. So, I think it's time to reach more normal people. It doesn't have to be completely normal people, but I think the relevance to day-to-day business or individual activity is the gap that needs to be bridged, basically. So, and that will also just make the sector far more durable and more resilient to price fluctuation downturns in the future. You do definitely see this with, I would say, stable coins were the first big real asset and suddenly have grown to quite a large market already. And they've had their challenges, especially the algorithmic ones. But I expect that other interesting and durable trades, asset classes will be far more resilient, or maybe not resilient is not the right word, maybe just less fluctuation prone, possibly, uncorrelated or anti-correlated with the big, Bitcoin, Ether, high market cap coins that do survive all of these downturns. And that will help a lot. We want to kind of decouple the utility of the technology from the prices to the extent possible and make it, again, consumer and business relevant. And I am not one of the people that believe it's technology in search of a use case. I sort of think that the best use case for getting rich quickly has just not been the best use case to get a lot of people onto the system, and that's been the problem.